Yo, word to the mamas and the papas. Welcome to the second episode of the world-famous Vinylology video series, where we rank the top 3,000 album releases of all time. This episode features the wonderful Bree, who is in my fam. So get ready, big yikes. Amputecture, a combination of the words amputate, technology, and architecture, is the third studio album by American progressive rock band the Mars Volta, released in 2006. Produced by guitarist and songwriter Omar Rodriguez Lopez, the album marks the final appearance of drummer John Theodore and is the first studio album to feature guitarist and sound manipulator Paul Hinojos, who is formerly of the bands At the Drive-In and Sparta. The album also features John Frusciante of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, who is playing lead guitar throughout. Amputecture marked the first album that the Mars Volta created an album without a single unifying narrative. Singer Cedric Bixler Zavala said inspirations for the album were very diverse, ranging from the recent U.S. immigration marches to the news stories of possessed nuns. Musically, the songs seem to embrace much more jazz rock elements and adds more Latin American lyrics than ever before. Unlike the Mars Volta's first two albums, Amputecture contains no original artwork. The background of each page in the album booklet is a section of Jeff Jordan's painting called Big Mutant. In addition, the custom label art itself features a painting called Dwarf Dancing, also by Jeff Jordan. The artwork is originally to be done by Storm Thorgerson, who designed the covers for the band's first two albums. His cover featured a picture of a woman standing in a field, warding off the presence of a giant floating skull decorated in a mirror ball fashion. There are a few sketches of this original artwork, one with the eyeball threatening a nun and the other one with a gypsy. It appears that Storm reused a theme his studio came up with for Pink Floyd's Pupilless Enigma, an internet puzzle apparently done for publicity for the album The Vision Bell that was never solved. Anyway, for reasons unknown, the Mars Volta was unhappy with Storm's submissions and used Jeff Jordan's art instead. Critically speaking, the album has been very divisive, with reviews being a mixture of both positive and negative and everything in between. Some praise the extreme experimentation and the lack of dependence on a concept, while others have called it overly self-indulgent and the lyrics mostly nonsensical and hard to follow. Most agree that this will be a difficult listen if this is your first experience with music of the Mars Volta and may test the listener's patience. My copy of this is from the Mars Volta La Realidad de los Sueños box set. The sound is absolutely fantastic, and I was so lucky to get a copy of this since it sold out almost immediately. The albums are spread nicely across two LPs with custom labels. My only small gripe is the vinyl has lock grooves, which after hearing them for the first time are very annoying thereafter. So I have to agree with most of the critics and give my personal grade of 6.5. The songs are extremely interesting on one hand. You could literally listen to this every day and constantly hear new elements in the songs. However, the sense of melody, dynamics, and song structure have been so abandoned that it's very difficult to really absorb it all. It sounds like a mishmash of song ideas just spliced together sometimes. Maybe this would have went over better if there was a consistent lyrical theme like their previous works. But don't get me wrong, this is still a great piece of work if you like progressive metal and like to be challenged in your listening experiences. My personal favorites on the album is the first track, Vicarious Atonement, and also Day of the Baphomets. It is kind of interesting that most of the lyrical content is religious in nature, but I don't think you would ever know that unless someone told you or you start Googling what some of the song titles mean. Album is the debut album by the American band Girls. It was released in 2009 on True Panther Sounds. Girls was an American indie rock band formed in San Francisco in 2007 that have since broken up. The band were comprised of two key members, Christopher Owens, songwriter and lead singer, and Chet J.R. White, who played bass and produced. Girls' sound was heavily inspired by the music of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, with their sound being described as lo-fi, surf rock, rock and roll, psychedelic rock, pop rock, country rock, and garage rock. Initial critical response to the album was extremely positive, with many accolades from music review sites such as Spin, Guardian, NME, and Pitchfork. Lead singer Owens has an interesting background in that he was born into the extremist Children of God cult for escaping to live on the streets at the age of 16. He had to catch up at a later age with the rest of modern society. But on an album, he seems to have made peace with his past and crafted songs to go along with his tales of redemption. Owens sings about dancing and hanging out with California girls in songs that ranges from Buddy Holly style rock to prom balladry to the strummy epic Hellhole Rat Race. There were only 2 vinyl releases released, and they were both released in 2009, with one distributed in the United States and the other in Europe. I have the United States version. I give this album a 6. It sounds like Southern California sunshine, like a lo-fi successor to the Beach Boys without some of the harmonies maybe, and is a definite throwback to music from the late 60s and early 70s. My favorite songs are Lust for Life, Goddamned, and Hellhole Rat Race, but the rest are honestly a little on the boring side. It sounds like something you might hear in a trendy coffee shop on a Saturday morning. I can understand why critics love this, and it is not bad, but I don't think it is phenomenal as the critics say. We're All Alright is the 18th studio album by American rock band Cheap Trick. It was released in 2017. The album's title refers to lyrics from the band's 1970 hit Surrender, as well as the end of the theme song to the television series That 70s Show, which the band performed. The album is the second in the band's history to not feature Bun E. Carlos on drums. Touring drummer Dax Nielsen, who is the son of legendary Cheap Trick guitarist Rick Nielsen, fills in on drums for the album. Having Dax on a drum kit seems to mean that the music has a more muscular, harder edge than their previous work with Carlos. There's basically only one regular album release, which I am showing now, and a numbered picture disc with a cheap PVC bag as a sleeve, which were both released in 2017. The picture disc is limited to 300, but other than maybe appealing to collectors, the regular version is better. It has a really nice gatefold with lots of photos of the band, and doesn't have the surface noise of the picture disc. My personal grade for this album is a 6.5. Honestly, this is not anything overly super special, but it is really nice having Cheap Trick rocking again, and this is a fun listen. The album is slightly better than their previous album, Bang Zoom Crazy Hello, which was released almost a year earlier, but both of these albums are very similar in that the band have ditched power pop and turned it into more straight ahead rock with lots of high energy guitar. My favorite songs are Long Time Coming, Brand New Name on the Old Tattoo, and a fantastic song on the end of side A called Floating Down that is definitely worth checking out. It is amazing when bands like this can put out good music so long into their careers. Blood is the third and final album released in 1991 by This Mortal Coil, an umbrella title for a loose grouping of guest musicians and vocalists brought together by 4AD label co-founder Evo Watts Russell. The supergroup consists primarily of artists attached to the 4AD label, of which Watts Russell was boss and president at the time. Blood follows the general pattern of the group's first 2 offerings. Once again, nearly half the tracks are instrumentals or tracks with minimal and often wordless female vocals, which were written by Evo Watts Russell and John Fryer. But critics generally find that the songs on Blood flow together much better, even if it was the least groundbreaking of the 3. The lengthy atmospheric explorations like Dreams Are Like Water sound composed and thoughtful rather than merely pretty. And like their group's other 2 offerings, the covers are brilliantly chosen. 2 songs are written by Big Star's Chris Bell, as well as a near symphonic reading of Spirit's song Nature's Way, and a version of Syd Barrett's Late Night that strips the song down to not much more than a voice and a low frequency hum. As such, the album was well received critically. In 2013, music publication NME ranked the album at 493 in its list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. Along with the music, the album's imagery combines the ethereal qualities of the songs and kind of molds the dreaminess with a goth element, featuring model Palais Citron. Since the album's initial release in 1991, the album was not re-released on vinyl until until the year 2018, which is the version I have. The newer pressing has slightly different artwork and is remastered. However, my copy is a little lacking in that it has some pops throughout. The pops are present even after cleaning, which kind of interferes a little more than usual with music such as this, and seems to be a common problem. Supposedly, the original 1991 pressings were better quality than it wants to look for if possible. My score for Blood is a 7. As a fan of dream pop in general, I was intrigued with this entry on the list, having not heard of them before. I found that the music is varied and pleasant, almost even romantic, and I really like the backing soundscapes on the instrumentals. And the vocals are nice and lush throughout by the various vocalists. Guitars tend to abruptly come out of nowhere and provide a nice change of pace. And I agree that the choice of covers is also very interesting. Really nice and pleasing through a set of headphones, and I can definitely recommend. And I especially like the songs I Come and Stand at Every Door and Dreams Are Like Water. This is the only time this mortal coil appears on the list. Universal Audio is the fifth and final studio album by Scottish indie rock band The Dagados, released in 2004. This band is led by Aileen Woodward and Emma Pollock, who both play guitar and sing. Usually a Pollock song will be followed by a Woodward song, and so on. The band named themselves after Spanish 1988 Tour de France winning cyclist Pedro Delgado. Universal Audio is considered to showcase a more stripped-down sound than its predecessor Hate, featuring less orchestral themes and has a more rock, almost poppy tone to the music. Unlike their previous works, the reverb has been turned way down, giving the music much more of a poppy sheen. About 7 months after this album's released, the band announced that they were splitting up in April 2005 due to the departure of bassist Stuart Henderson. Henderson found it difficult to pour so much of his energy and time into something that never quite seemed to get the attention or respect it deserved. Since the band's breakup, songwriters Pollock and Woodward pursued individual projects. Also in 2005, the track I Fought the Angels from Universal Audio has been used in both an episode of Grey's Anatomy in 2006 as well as the BBC show Three's Lip Service in 2010. There's only been one vinyl release, released in 2004, of course. It's starting to get hard to find, so I recommend being on the lookout for this as soon as possible. The record was released on a label called Chemical Underground, which is a label that the Dagados started in 1995. The record label still exists, so it's possible that this album gets re-released in the future. My personal grade for Universal Audio is a 7. This is a really good band and a really good album. I especially like I Fought the Angels and Keep on Breathing. The music has some serious depth and the lyrics are good too. It is a shame that this band didn't get the recognition they deserve, but they made this top 3,000 albums of all time list, so that is something, I guess. Congratulations to the Dagados. This is their only entry on the list, however. The second album in a row from the year 2004, Sex, Love, and Rock and Roll, is the sixth album by the American punk rock band Social Distortion. It was their first studio album in 8 years, the longest gap between Social Distortion's studio albums to date. This album is Social Distortion's first to feature a new guitarist following the death of original guitarist Dennis Donnell in February 2000. The album's opening track, Reach for the Sky, was released in late 2004 and has become one of Social Distortion's biggest hits. The album was originally scheduled to be released in the fall 2000, but was officially released 4 years later. The delays seem to be partly because of their various other activities, most obviously those of frontman Mike Ness, where he released 2 solo albums in 1999. Touring behind those projects and matters pertaining to Donnell's death set this album aside for a number of years before they finally completed it in the year 2004. During the writing and recording period, the band overcame some band lineup changes. As already mentioned, guitarist Dennis Donnell died from a brain aneurysm, leaving Ness as the only remaining original member of the band. There also have been some rumors claiming that the band broke up again during this time following Donnell's death. He was replaced by Johnny Wickersham, who was previously Donnell's guitar technician. Drummer Chuck Biscuits had also left during this time. Just a month before the release of the album, longtime bassist John Maurer left the band to stay with his family and was replaced temporarily by Rancid's Matt Freeman. He stayed until late 2004 and was then replaced again by current bassist Brent Harding. My copy is a re-release from Craft Recordings that had been put out in 2019. Apparently they used the same vinyl pressing plates as the original Time Bomb pressings, so I would assume that it doesn't matter too much what release you get. The dynamic range is a little low. Critical reviews of Sex, Love, and Rock and Roll were mostly positive. The album was ranked number 456 in Rock Hard Magazine's book of the 500 greatest rock and metal albums of all time. My score for this album is a 6.5. It starts off super strong with the title track. That song is exceptional, and it kind of settles into lukewarm territory thereafter. This release has less punk and less country influences, and is instead very good straight-ahead rock and roll. I do really like the attitude on all the songs, and the overall message seems to be to stay strong and withstand adversity, which makes sense with what the band had just gone through. Voodoo is the 8th studio album by Danish heavy metal band King Diamond, released in 1998. It is the first album to feature drummer John Luke Hebert and the last to feature guitarist Herb Simonson and bassist Chris Estes. Voodoo is a concept album that takes place in the year 1932 and deals with the Lafayette family, consisting of Sarah, who is pregnant, David, and Grandpa. They moved to an old colonial house on the Mississippi River just north of Baton Rouge, which also happens to have been built next to a voodoo graveyard. Unknown to the Lafayettes, the house's servant, named Salem, is involved in voodoo. Salem partakes in voodoo rituals at the graveyard, along with other shameless characters in the story. After the Lafayettes hear the voodoo drums from the nearby graveyard ceremonies, they decide to destroy the voodoo burial ground. Salem tries to stop this by attempting to kill the family. He does this by using snakes, haunted graveyard dirt, and of course my favorite, goofer dust. David and Grandpa become very ill, and Sarah becomes possessed with a voodoo spirit. Grandpa calls an exorcist who attempts an exorcism on Sarah, but unfortunately fails. But somehow, Grandpa talks Sarah back to sanity. Hero Grandpa then calls the police and the ambulance and basically saves the day. The story concludes with the Lafayettes abandoning the old colonial house after leaving the hospital. Sarah's child was born, and it was speaking in the strangest tongue, backwards. Sorry. Voodoo is one of the best-selling King Diamond albums. It peaked at number 27 on the Finnish charts, remaining 4 weeks in the top 40, and it peaked at number 55 in the Swedish charts. Voodoo was remastered by Andy LaRocque in 2009. My copy is from The Story of Metal Blade by Vinyl Me Please, which has the remastered version. Packaging and artwork is incredible, with black and blue splatter. However, I measured the dynamic range as a 10, so it must be sourced from a digital source or slightly compressed. So my grade. I'm not digging this at all. King Diamond sure has a voice, and the guitars are nice and crunchy, but the whole album is just, well, kind of goofy. The songs Life After Death and the title track are probably the best of the lot. The story of the Lafayette family being set in your typical New Orleans setting with witchcraft and ghosts and of course voodoo, I felt like I was listening to the equivalent of a movie like Voodoo Dawn or White Zombie, which isn't necessarily bad, but it just isn't too original. In the latter 1980s and 90s, King Diamond was quickly releasing albums one by one covering all sorts of horror material, and this is supposedly one of the better ones, but it just isn't for me. Hard Promises is the 4th studio album by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, released in 1981 on Backstreet Records. The album features the song The Waiting, which was a US Top 20 song, and also has guest vocals from Stevie Nicks on 2 songs. The Heartbreakers also recorded the Stevie Nicks hit Stop Dragging My Heart Around for her Belladonna album around the time Hard Promises was recorded. This was the second Tom Petty album on the Backstreet Records label. One interesting item of note is that the album's release was delayed while Petty and his distributor MCA Records argued about the list price. The album was slated to be the next MCA release with the new suggested list price of $9.98, following some other high-profile releases with that same price point. This so-called superstar pricing was $1 more than the usual list price of $8.98 that almost all other albums were priced at that time. Petty voiced his objections to the price hike in the press, and the issue became a popular cause among music fans. Non-delivery of the album, or just simply calling the album $8.98, was considered, but eventually MCA decided against the price increase. Hard Promises was the last full album to feature original bassist Ron Blair until the year 2010, although he would make guest appearances on other albums. He was replaced by Howie Epstein, who continued to play until 2002 due to deteriorating health. During the recording of the album, John Lennon was scheduled to be in the same studio at the same time as Petty, and Petty was looking forward to meeting him. The meeting never occurred, as Lennon was murdered before the date of the planned visit to the studio. Petty and the band paid tribute to the slain former Beatle by etching "We Love You, JL" in the run-out dead wax of the original 1981 United States and Canadian pressings. My copy is from the Complete Studio Albums Volume 1 box set and sounds great, and I completely recommend if you're a Tom Petty fan. All 9 of Petty's first 9 albums are in the box and have been remastered. I give this particular album a 6.5. It's definitely a drop-off in quality as far as songwriting goes over Petty's previous albums, but The Waiting and A Woman in Love are fantastic songs, and a bunch of other songs are good, but just not great. I also really like A Thing About You. This song slaps. The production and musicianship are top-notch. Wow, that is 3 box sets altogether on this one episode. Queens of Noise is the second studio album by the American rock band The Runaways. Released in 1977 on Mercury Records, just 7 months after the first album, it is fundamentally a hard rock album, although it also exhibits influence from punk rock, heavy metal, glam rock, and blues rock. While the album mostly consists of heavy, guitar-driven tracks, it also features 2 noticeably softer songs that have sometimes been described as early power ballads. The album has received generally positive reviews and has remained the band's best-selling record in the United States. The album was recorded in Santa Monica, California, with a greater emphasis on volume as well as more musical sophistication. With the exception of the one song, Midnight Music, all the songs on the album were recorded live at the same time. While critics at the time recognized that the Runaways possessed tremendous potential going forward and eagerly anticipated their next studio album, Queens of the Noise was unfortunately the final studio album to feature either lead singer Cherie Currie or bass player Jackie Fox. This shakeup seemed to have started with the recording of the first song on the album, Queens of Noise, which Currie thought she was going to sing on. While she was out of the studio recovering from an abortion, guitarist Joan Jett did the vocals instead. This seemed to have caused a heated debate that contributed to the group fracturing, which they never recovered from. Multiple songs from the album were featured in the 2010 film about the band. In addition to the inclusion of the album version of Hollywood, it also featured covers of California Paradise, Queens of Noise, and I Love Playing with Fire, recorded by Dakota Fanning and Kristen Stewart, who respectively portrayed Currie and Jett. My copy is a reissue with newer looking Mercury labels from an unknown year, probably in the middle 1980s. There is a newer pressing in 2019 from which my understanding sounds good, but the cover is cheaply reproduced and kind of grainy. Appealing to creepy older men everywhere, the cover features all 5 of the Runaways in a stripper pole theme, partially obscured by smoke, which was taken at the last moment before the girls all started choking. The back cover features a similar photograph that is posed differently and does not feature any smoke, which was originally intended to be the front cover image but was later switched. My personal score for this is a 7. I love the attitude, and it's hard to imagine a time when all-girl rock bands didn't exist, so I appreciate the breaking of new ground. My favorite songs are Queens of Noise, Born to Be Bad, and I Love Playing with Fire. For some reason, the harmonies in the chorus of Midnight Music remind me of ABBA. However, the last 7-minute-long song called Giant Guitar is kind of dumb and meaningless, even though it highlights Lita Ford's technical guitar skills. It is truly a bad song and goes on way too long. Blows Against the Empire is a concept album by Paul Kantner, released under the name Paul Kantner and Jefferson Starship. It is the first album to use the Starship moniker, a name which Kantner and Grace Slick would later use for the band Jefferson Starship. From a commercial standpoint, and performed comparably to Jefferson Airplane albums of the era, peaking at number 20 on the Billboard 200 and receiving a gold certification. This is the second album from the Jefferson Airplane and Starship families that appears on this list. While Jefferson Airplane was on a break in 1970, Kantner took advantage of the hiatus to work on a solo album. The album was recorded in San Francisco and features a collection of musicians from various San Francisco bands, including Jefferson Airplane, The Grateful Dead, and Quicksilver Messenger Service, along with Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young that were also recording at the same time. These musicians included David Crosby, Jerry Garcia, Mickey Hart, Graham Nash, Grace Slick, and others. Stylistically, the songs range from light folk to psychedelic rock. Mostly, however, the songs are delivered in the kind of improvised, free-form rock and roll that was representative of the Bay Area bands of the day. Lyrically, the album celebrates countercultural idealism, depicting people celebrating mind expansion and free love. It's set in a future where the counterculture is able to unite and decide their own fate far away from planet Earth. They condemn the divisive structures of conservative society and dream of finding a utopia. To go along with this theme, two of the tracks consist entirely of sound effects simulating starship engines and spaceflight, and scattered throughout are heavily processed background vocal tracks and sound bites, including one from the movie War of the Worlds. The image on the front cover features a piece of Russian folk art from a painted lacquer box. Kantner has said he enjoyed stealing the art from Russia because many Jefferson Airplane albums were bootlegged on the Russian black market. The back cover painting depicts a partially open package carried by, you guessed it, winged boobs, and has Jerry Garcia peeking out of the package. My copy's from one of the 2020 Record Store Day Drops, which I braved the COVID-19 pandemic to get. This is the 50th anniversary edition on 180 gram green marble vinyl. Even though this was limited to 3,000 copies, it is currently not that hard to get. You can usually find copies between $20 and $30. I give this album a score of 5.5. It's not bad at all, but it isn't something that I would want to listen to over and over. A Child Is Coming is probably the best track, and Hijack is catchy. The science fiction concept story, if you bother trying to understand it, in today's world comes across as a little goofy. Probably the best part of this is all the excellent musicians playing together, and the harmonies are great. Grace Slick's piano playing also stands out. There you go. The riveting conclusion of the second of 300 videos celebrating the absolute best vinyl releases of all time. If you like this, please consider subscribing and giving it a like. Thanks, and have a good day.